Good afternoon to you. I'm going to go over chapter 4 a little bit, and then I also wanted to talk somewhat about the type of work you're going to be doing. I know many of you will get into law enforcement, but obviously there are different facets of it. I mean, you can become a municipal police officer, a state trooper, and then within like the state police, you become a fire marshal, a traffic reconstruction expert, a crime scene specialist. They have fire marshals. The state police also do like bus inspections, motor vehicle truck inspections. They work on the Pennsylvania Turnpike and so on. So it's really, there's lots of possibilities. Obviously, you can work for the sheriff's department. You can work in juvenile probation. The list is really, really developed. I mean, you can become a counselor in a prison. You can help inmates find work when they leave prison. So there's lots and lots of possibilities for you to do. And one of the points about being connected with WCCC is that, I mean, many of you will get your associate degree here. And then if you do get into law enforcement on a full-time basis, you have to go through continuing education classes and so on. And then there's a public safety and training center down in Smithton. And so many times there is, deadly weapons training, hostage negotiations training, report writing. It goes on. It can get pretty developed. You know, when you're, how to, drive a vehicle effectively at high speeds. So there's quite a bit that this college does that you will find to be helpful to you, in your career. One of the key points that I wanted to stress to you, though, is there are, when you write reports, when you initially write the narrative report, and then when you write the affidavit of probable cause to file with the magistrate's office, many cases are pretty simple and straightforward. And I'll just give you two examples to illustrate that point, and then there are some that become more complicated. And a good example is I had a former student who ended up getting a DUI, and he was driving through the McDonald's parking lot in South Greensburg, and the state police observed him pulling out at a unsafe speed, spinning the tires, and he went down the highway and was speeding a little bit, going down Route 119 into Greensburg. So they pulled him over, and they found out that he was intoxicated, and so he got a DUI, and I believe he had a previous DUI before that. And so what happened is he lost his license. So he, had to pay all these fines and everything. So about 2 months later, he was still driving his vehicle. He's driving a WCCC. He's coming off of the Pennsylvania Turnpike on Route 119 into Youngwood and headed to the college. There was a state trooper at the Sunoco station there, right where you turn to Hillis. He was coming out, and so he was stopped. And my student is driving, and his car had a valid inspection and emission sticker. He wasn't speeding, and he had a valid registration. So he gets stopped. And, like I said, he was going the speed limit as well. He gets stopped, and, the state trooper recognized him and said, "Hey, I arrested you a couple months ago. What are you doing driving a vehicle?" And the student says, "You really had no reason to stop me. You didn't have any probable cause." He said, "Yes, I did. I recognized you, and I knew that you were not licensed to drive a vehicle. That gives me probable cause to stop you." So he was arrested, and he went to the magistrate and tried to fight it. Didn't make any difference, because it was him driving the car, and he had nothing to say to argue, that particular point. So he had to pay a really hefty fine, and he was fortunate he didn't end up going to jail as a result of this incident. There was also, too, Magistrate Jim Falcon comes to our class, who's the magistrate right behind WCCC, and he often talks about different cases and so on. But one of the cases, actually, that I recall, I took a group of students up to the courtroom, and it was a neighbor of mine. It's actually a former neighbor since he no longer lives there. But what happens is he was by import-export tire on Route 119. He was in the bank parking lot there. I guess he was getting some money from the ATM. The state trooper observes him pulling out of the parking lot. He had an Acura vehicle, two-door coupe, and he just gassed it. And so by the time he got to the top of the hill, the state trooper was behind him, and he was going approximately 70 miles an hour, and the speed limit there is 45. And then he also observed him weaving 4 or 5 times, crossing the yellow line. So state trooper stops him, and when he shines the light into the vehicle, he notices there's 4 cans of Coors Light on the back seat on the floor, and there was also an odor of marijuana. So he asked him, have you been smoking marijuana? Have you been drinking? He said, yes, sir, I have. He arrests him and takes him to Westmoreland Excel Hospital, draws blood, and just basically checks for intoxicants, and charges are filed, and that's it. But there are other cases that are much more complex, and they're looked at much more closely. And there was an incident that took place here in Youngwood a couple years ago, and I believe it was on a weeknight. But what happened was this man was at the bar there by Hillis, where you can turn to go to WCCC the back way, and he was crossing. There was a man crossing the highway. He just ran across the highway, and this individual that hit him didn't see him, and all of a sudden he hit him and ran him over, and the man died. And so I know when the state police checked his blood alcohol content, I think it was at 0.9 or 0.10, just barely over the legal limit. But they did file charges because he did hit this man while intoxicated. But even if he was not intoxicated, I mean, at 2 o'clock or 2:30 a.m., on a dark night, it was somewhat foggy. I mean, even with the best of reflexes, you can be a brand new driver with perfect reflexes, but you would still hit that individual. So I know that they were looking at, all the mitigating factors and so on, and they started to look at, how fast they knew this man was driving, and other types of situations like that. But I can tell you that in other situations similar to this, that they will look at the report writing. Was the person described correctly? Were they right about the right height, the right weight? Was the vehicle car color correct? The weather, and so on. That a former student that I had in class that was a state trooper gave this example, that they arrested a man, and it happened, it was in the summertime, and he was wearing a jacket. It was 85 degrees at night. It was humid. And so they noticed him looking in and out of businesses, that he had something under his coat. They don't know if it was a weapon. So they stopped him, and here he had a tire iron and some other types of paraphernalia tools to break into buildings. And then they also found some stolen items in his car. But when he went to court, his defense attorneys said that they did not have sufficient probable cause to stop, detain, and arrest him, and that the charges should have been thrown out, and so on. And believe me, they were very, very much contested. And so they were able to successfully, the state police, my students said they were able to successfully win this case, but it was tougher than they thought it, would have been. And sometimes, too, when you get involved in certain cases, they can sometimes take a very long time to resolve. And this student gave this example in our class. There was an incident that took place at Ohio State Park. And what happened is that this husband and wife and their 2 children, one child was about 4 or 5 years old, and the other child was a toddler, maybe 2 years old, maybe 18 months, something in that vicinity. So the mother and father go to this keg party at Ohio State Park. It's like an October night. It's about 45 degrees outside, but they leave the vehicle on, a minivan, leave the heater on, and so the children fall asleep. And then they were at the cake party about 2.5 or 3 hours. They come back. The older child is fine. The younger child is dead. So they ended up calling the police. You know, the state police get involved. And so they start to do an investigation. And this case went on for 2 years. But I mean, the student that investigated it, you know, had to get involved with the autopsy, had to get involved with Child and Youth Protective Services, and he had to go the whole ways through. And the autopsy was inconclusive because, you know, if you can die from hypothermia, I believe, which is hypo or hyperthermia is, you know, when the body gets too cold, and that can be the cause of death. And then, of course, you know, when you're in a vehicle like that and you have the engine running, you can, you know, die from carbon monoxide. And so that is a factor. But what they found is neither of those were the case. And so the defense for these parents argued that it was SIDS, Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, and the state police, you know, basically were arguing that it was, you know, that the parents were, you know, were responsible for the death of this child, you know. So they filed those sorts of charges. And like I said, this student said, this trooper said it went on for 2 years, and at the very end of this, the resolution of it was that they ended up losing the case. They could not sufficiently prove without, you know, you know, with reasonable certainty that these parents caused a death, even though who would ever leave a child for 2.5 or 3 hours while you're at a cake party? And so sometimes these cases you lose, so you just don't ever know, but you do the best that you can to document them. And just the last incident that I wanted to share with you is I had a former student that is a police officer up in Ligonier Township, and she said that one of the things that you always need to consider when you get in law enforcement is that sometimes you will be by yourself very, very far from other people. And she said on her first week on the job, she stopped a man out in Ligonier Township on some farm, and the neighbor said he was doing something suspicious, but she's on a dirt lane a mile basically from anyone else. And she tells this man to basically put his hands up and come out of the vehicle and put his hands on the vehicle, and he didn't. And he started to walk toward her and started to ask questions and everything, and she said, stop. And eventually he did, but she said it really made her nervous. So sometimes those situations can occur. And the other thing that she said is sometimes as a police officer, you get involved in very difficult situations. And she had to go to the scene of an accident where one boy accidentally shot another in the face with a pistol, and the boy died. And so she said that was extremely difficult, and she had to take some time off from work. So it takes special people to be in law enforcement because there are so many situations you deal with, and so many of them can be unpredictable, you know, overall. I wanted to refer, though, to Chapter 4 a little bit and talk somewhat about the rules of narrative writing. First one is the first person, and that would be I, me, my, we, and so on. And that's important because it's showing what you are doing. The second one is the past tense, and that's what you have to do in narrative writing because you're writing about something that happened in the past. And that's very important. And when you start off a narrative, you want to start off with the date, the time, and how you got involved. Were you called by 911? Did you get involved because you observed someone demonstrating unsafe behavior? Were they speeding or whatever? Were you called to assist another officer? That's very, very important to do. And by the way, as well, there might be several officers involved in an incident, but only one person will write the actual narrative and then the affidavit of probable cause. The active voice is showing who is doing what. I observed Ritzik, you know, smashing the car window, or I spoke to Thomas, who was belligerent after I asked him several questions. But that's what the active voice, the doer of the action, more so at the start of the sentence. The fourth one is chronological order. Just use regular chronological time. You don't have to use military time. You can just use 8:30 p.m. or whatnot, because what you have to remember for the reports that you write and so on, you're going to be the people. If you have to go to trial, the people that are going to read them are going to be average citizens, and they're not going to understand military time, and they're certainly not going to understand 1028 or radio code or police jargon. Just use simple language. I was on jury duty before, and I was not selected. The people sometimes that are selected are those who maybe might not have the best education and might even have a criminal history for that matter. But defense attorneys are looking for jurors who will give their client a fair hearing. And so, as I said, sometimes you might be dealing with people who don't have a high level of education. So, keep your reports simple. And so they do go through the chronological order. The fifth one is to use concrete, concise words. Don't say weapon. Say, for example, a 6-inch hunting knife, or a Glock 9mm pistol. You can say pistol first, and then later when you find what it is, then you can be more specific. But that's important. There was an article in the Tribune Review some years back, and the article said that an individual who was actually a firefighter who was working at this one fireman's fair in Fayette County hit a person who became belligerent with a heavy object. And later on, the next day, it was actually one of those pipe wrenches that's used to open up a fire hydrant, and those must weigh 10 pounds. And so something like that, you can be much, much more specific about it. When you write, you would not ever say, that I discovered several cans of alcohol or some alcohol, like the example that I used before, observed or I found 4 cans of Coors Light 16-ounce cans that were cold at the touch, or 2 half-empty bottles of Jack Daniels and Jim Beam. And so that is much, much more accurate. When you write as well, you want to state what you initially saw, and then you can indicate what you later discovered. So, if you're stopping me and I have something in my hand like this, it's a shiny metal object, and then later on you discover that it's a paper opener, a letter opener, but maybe later on you would discover it's a knife, it's a pistol or whatever. So you basically state what you initially saw. Spell correctly, and if you don't know how to spell a more complicated word, use a simpler word. That's the biggest step as far as that goes. And then it says use last names without titles. The first time that you have someone, unless it's a number of family members, you can just give their first and last name, like Michael Ritzik, and then after that you could just say Ritzik said. And if you want to put the person's name in all capital letters, that's fine. If there's a number of family members, then obviously you would say Michael Ritzik said, Vicky Ritzik commented, and so on. So you would do that. And like I said, avoid radio code and jargon. And then if you look on page 38, you want to use quotes when a victim tells you, when a witness tells you what a suspect said during the commission of the crime, and when a suspect admits guilt. So that's it. I just wanted to cover that chapter and get into some of the key elements, but I also wanted to express to you that as a police officer, detective, investigator, whatever it is that you do, sometimes your writing is going to be scrutinized and looked at by many, many people, and so it is incumbent upon you to be as specific as you can, because believe me, it pays dividends. Thank you very much.